So, as Tabby pointed out, I'm Jamie Gordon. I'm an audio designer at nDreams. Some stuff before I kind of get into this. I'm kind of going to cover what I did before I got into the industry. A bit about my background, how I got into the industry, things I wish I'd known, and some tips for portfolio because they're always good, they're always useful, and hopefully it helps someone get that interview, get that job, and get on the path for their dream career, really. So hopefully some of that is useful for you. There's some rants in there. There's some, learning communication skills in here. There's a lot less, this is how I made an explosion effect sort of stuff. It's more, avoid doing this or do this sort of approach. So sorry to disappoint you if you wanted to know how we make awesome explosions or gunshots or monster roars or any of that. But there's plenty of amazing tutorials on that. But yeah, anyway, so a bit about my time before the industry. I got an undergraduate degree in audio production. And when I finished that, I had no clue what I was going to do. So I did a master's degree, postgraduate degree in sound and music for interactivity. During that time, I was kind of infatuated with synthesizers, building synths and effect plugins in Max MSP / Max for Live and Pure Data, and was just genuinely interested in more interactive audio as opposed to linear approaches like music or film or TV. And I think that kind of ties in well with synths to some degree. So that was a little bit before I got into the industry. I kind of had an interesting step in. I know a lot of people typically apply for audio roles and nothing else. And whilst I know a lot of people get success doing that, some people miss out on a great opportunity to go in and do something like QA. When jobs are asking for 3 releases, in their experience section, QA gives you that in some regard, and it's a great way of pestering that company's audio team. I think that's how I got my start, was annoying Dovetail's audio team to the point that when an audio position opened up, they were like, well, we've got to give him an interview, otherwise he's just going to make our lives hell. So maybe consider that. But when I started as a QA tester at Dovetail. After 6 months, I went into embedded QA testing. I then went to associate designer and then level 1 and level 2 designer after that. And then nearly 2 years ago now, I moved to nDreams. So kind of had some interesting experiences from hyper-realistic simulation games to, iconic IPs and more creative roles, like Ghostbusters and Synapse. So projects I've worked on, I've had core releases for Train Sim 1 to Train Sim 3 with a lot of DLC, multiple Fishing Sim World releases, worked on Ghostbusters Rise of the Ghost Lord and Synapse. If you're wondering what I mean by a lot of DLC, I wanted to do a bit of research and kind of show this because it's kind of funny when you see it in perspective. There's 55 Train Sim 2 DLCs, and you can imagine how quickly you have to work in a year to release 55 DLCs. And then for Train Sim 3, there's 82. Thankfully, I'd left Dovetail and never got around to doing 82 on that one. But yeah, be prepared, because in the industry sometimes you land roles like that and you got to hit the ground running, really. Great experience, but it's a lot. It's fast paced. So kind of got some examples of the work. For Ghostbusters, this was an additional game mode. It's not part of the main story, which uses mixed reality. So it's kind of, you can see the room you're in, and the marshmallow puff man destroys your ceiling and you have to fight him. It's a really fun game mode to work on. It felt a little bit like a game jam, so I'll just show you some of that.
Is that a bag of Stay Puffed marshmallows? Ugh, it's moving. You really should take a look at that. Ah, that explains... Wait, where'd it go? Ah, I've never seen these guys float around like this before. You're gonna need to catch it. Be careful. They may look cute, but they have a nasty temper. Hey, well done. Oh, you've upset it now. I told you they were mean. This one time... Hey, where's it going now? That can't be good. Whoa! Okay, okay, okay. A giant marshmallow just broke a hole in your ceiling. You've got to stop that thing before it makes this worse. Wait, what about the ecto shot I sent you? Reach over your shoulder to grab it. That's it. Now grab a mini puffed and load it into the ecto shot. Now pull back the lever. Oh, the mini exploded. The ecto shot must be destabilizing them. Huh, it bounced right off. Maybe try hitting him in the eye.
So there was just a little bit of the mini puffed mayhem game mode, and then here's a little bit of Synapse. A little bit of backstory that I'm really proud of is we got to work with David Hayter and Jennifer Hale for VO on this. So as you can imagine, little Jamie was very excited about that. So a bit of variety there from, the realism of train sim to, the more creative freedom of those two games. So for those who don't know what audio designers do, I'll kind of break that down a little bit. It largely depends on, the size of studio you're at. Bigger companies will have audio departments that have many, many layers. You might have creative audio designers that just handle making assets. You might have technical audio designers that will handle how assets are played back, manipulated, and some system setup. Audio programmers who will make you tools and reverb algorithms and fix any engine issues. I've got a few stories about that later on. They'll have VO designers who handle VO editing and implementation, music designers who will make music, sometimes implement them, music implementators at some places. They'll obviously have like a music dedicated team, audio managers and directors. This sort of list is only really seen at large scale companies, but you do see them occasionally. Know a few people that work in that sort of environment. But that's not what I do. Unfortunately, my role is a little bit more complicated. So what I do, well, at both companies, at Dovetail and nDreams, we had very small teams that kind of had to cover every situation. So at Dovetail, at one point we had 3 audio designers, and we were split across 2 projects. So I would be on fishing for a while the other 2 were on trains, and then when they needed assistance on trains, I'd go and help them. And at nDreams, we have 7 audio members. 2 are audio programmers. One of the audio programmers is permanently with one of our in-house studios, and the other one kind of floats between the other 3 studios that make up nDreams. The team that has the permanent audio programmer also has 2 permanent sound designers, so that makes up 4 of the 7. The other 3 designers are on individual projects by themselves, and I am one of those 3. So I'm on a project by myself majority of the time, unless we have major deadlines, and then we might, borrow someone from another project to kind of help pick up the pace when we need to. But typically, we've got to wear many hats at once. Keeps it exciting, but it can get a bit hectic, as you can imagine. So my day-to-day typically looks like I'll be creating assets. If you're into sound design, you'll know you've got to make many variations for a single sound. So if you've got footsteps, you've obviously got your material types, but then you've got variations within that material type. So you might have 10 sounds for stone, 10 sounds for wood, etc. Or you might have dogs barking, you need a library of dogs barking, etc. So we'll be making all those assets. They can be layered if they need to be. We'll be making those, implementing them and setting up things like effects. So your bus sends in engine, setting up reverb zones and occlusion. We typically outsource a lot of our music, but we then do the implementation side of it, which is cool, but it can get a bit crazy when you're having to juggle actually putting in sounds to the game and building a really complicated music system that only you understand. Can be a bit of a nightmare for some people. We handle VO editing, VO implementation. Some teams want audio designers to set up haptics, because obviously on some consoles you can have haptics based on sound effects. So sometimes we might handle that. And then because we're all on different projects, we don't have audio directors or managers, so we also handle task planning. So it gets pretty wild. Yeah, it's exciting though, but it's fast paced. So if you're looking to get into audio, what do we use typically? Most studios for non-game tools will use Reaper. Some people use Cubase or Nuendo. Most places I see prefer things like Reaper or Pro Tools. More Reaper though, because it's you can backdoor it, you can code for it, you can make pipelines from Reaper to your middleware. If you're not comfortable with Reaper, you can install themes to make it look like Ableton and Pro Tools, and have all the same keyboard shortcuts. So people typically like you using that just because of how customizable it is. Obviously, as audio designers, we typically use many different synths, VSTs, effects. We try to learn as many as we can because depending on what studio you're at, they might not have licenses for certain things. They might not have budget for your fab filter libraries and all of that. So you kind of have to be flexible with what you can use. A lot of studios don't like you using your own stuff. So if any of you blow all of your hard-earned money on audio toys, like I do, unfortunately, you might not be able to use them. But for game tools, kind of depends on the studio. We use we use Unreal Engine for all our games. Some projects might use native Unreal sound, so sound cues and meta sounds. Synapse used Wise. Ghostbusters used Fmod. The middleware kind of depends on the project. If we're working with people, so for Synapse we worked with Sony, and obviously they own Audio Kinetic, who make Wise, so they asked that we use Wise. So yeah, it kind of depends on the projects and the need of the project, really. If you are looking to get into Reaper, as I've mentioned, I thought I'd just throw this out there. The free version is incredibly generous, and then the licensing fees are ridiculously cheap as well. So if you're looking to take audio seriously, I recommend hopping on that train, because the value you get out of it is second to none in my eyes. I use it every day. As soon as someone asks for an edit, I open this over anything else. Yeah, so let's go on to the things I actually wish I knew before I got into the industry. First one is just a better understanding of blueprints. I'm a firm believer of you can never know enough of this sort of stuff, and this and coding. The amount of times I've been in meetings with gameplay designers or programmers, and I am completely confused. They're talking all this gibberish that just goes straight over my head. One of the programmers I worked with said to me one time, was like, it's okay that some of this stuff confuses you. What you do confuses us, and ultimately what you're here to do is make the game sound good. But if you can make everyone's job easier and communicate better and say, this is how I want it, this is what I want to be able to do, it makes everyone's life easier. So learn some blueprinting. It will make your life so much easier in the long run. And when you get stuck, remember to communicate with other departments, because you're a team. You're all there for the same goal of making a great product, and sitting to yourself and getting confused and annoyed with something isn't going to help you there. So remember to communicate, keep trying to learn the tech, because that's just how you get better. Continuation of that, I guess, is more communication. Learn other departments' lingo and try to teach them your audio lingo. I've found this one really important and a massive time saver. We have a few situations where people have lost weeks of work because of certain comments that have a word in that someone doesn't actually understand. And the first story here is about reverb. A person I was working with was told by a game director that a sound has too much reverb. So he goes into his DAW, he takes out some reverb, exports it, puts it in game, submits it. The next day he gets the same complaint, and he goes on with this for about a week. It then gets to the point where he just removes the reverb and gets the same complaint. There's too much reverb. So he goes into the game and removes all the level reverbs and gets the same complaint. To which his response was, that's not possible. There is 0 reverb in our game. You don't know what you're on about. There's then a massive argument for him to then find out that actually what the person meant was he didn't like the chorus effect, which, if you know much about effects, are 2 massively different things. And it wasted a week of this guy's time, and he was very annoyed and upset about it. So, yeah. Teach people audio lingo, learn other departments' lingo. It helps everyone. There's another one which, again, if you're an audio designer, you will get this one a lot. And it's the use of the word muddy. And it's one of my biggest pet peeves. Typically, when audio designers talk about muddy sounds, it's from lower mids to sub-bass region. There's clashes of frequencies there. If you talk to non-audio designers, the sub-bass can be muddy, the bass can be muddy, the lower mids can be muddy, the mids can be muddy, the upper mid, everything can be muddy. And that doesn't point us in the direction we need to look in to fix something. I'm not saying you need to know every terminology of every department, but if you make an effort to learn these things and help other people learn these things, it makes your workplace such a nice place to work, because you can talk and communicate more clearly. You can find your issues more clearly. You make better products clearer. And yeah, just I can't hit home enough the importance of communication, especially with small teams. You've got to really be on the ball with that one. So, number 3, this one was very tough for me to learn, because you sometimes you make something that you're really proud of, and you're like, oh, I can't wait to use this on the next project or in this area. But you need to take a step back sometime and recognize every project and team is different. And just because something worked on a previous project or in the past doesn't mean it's going to work on the next. Sometimes it's because the tone of the projects are completely different. Sometimes it's gameplay changes. Sometimes you have tech limitations that just do not allow for some of those ideas to cross over. If you're working on a PC only release, an approach you take on that is not going to be viable on an iPhone. They're just 2 different beasts. So always look at each project as a new opportunity to learn and develop these skills. Yeah. So, thing I wish I'd known, number 4, is more middleware. It's kind of self-explanatory, but every company uses different middleware. Some don't use any middleware and just use native Unreal stuff. Dovetail was like that. I got my start just using native Unreal stuff, and then I got my position at nDreams, and I was kind of thrown in the deep end on a project by myself using Wise or Fmod on other projects, and I didn't have much experience. It was frightening having to manage all of that and learn these skills. I did it, but I couldn't get the work done as fast as I would have liked to, because I'm still understanding the workflows of it. So that's one thing I recommend, is try and learn as much of these things as you can before you need them, because when you're in the position of you've got deadlines and you've got build reviews and all of this, and you're learning basics, it makes you look a bit of a novice, and you never want that. Even if you are a novice, you don't want to come across that in a cutthroat industry like this. So try and learn as much of this stuff as you can. I know it's daunting, but you'll be thankful, and yeah, it just helps so much. Thing I wish I'd known 5, and this one is, I think, every audio designer's nightmare, is how last minute audio is considered in some cases. A lot of the time we are at the very end of a chain. If you think about character design, they usually get concept art start making things, gameplay start, making the interactions of a character. A lot of the time we can't start doing our stuff for them until we've got gameplay events to trigger off and art that we can base our sound off. If someone's on fire, we need to be able to kind of visualize that, or give that a sound. You need to be able to match aesthetics, and you need those two things in conjunction to be able to do your work properly. It can be kind of difficult. So yeah, it gets a bit hairy at times when you've got deadlines and they're like, well, audio haven't even started this yet. We've got a week. This sometimes leads to other people seeming to think that we just make a sound and it magically plays. I've had this argument with so many people. Like, we've got a lot to consider. I go on to mention this further down, but when you're in these situations, you need to be proactive. You need to be, again, communicating with team, trying to get them to tell you when things are ready or are going to be ready, get descriptions and concept art, and build soundscapes to show the higher ups, this is what I think this level should sound like. Start making all your generic sounds first, things that you kind of don't need any visual cues for. Wind, ambient loops, footstep libraries. If your concept artist said, oh, this character is going to be wearing armor, you can base your footsteps off that pretty early on and then tweak them later. But you want to try and get the most generic sounds done as early as possible, so then you can just fire them in as soon as it's available. Start asking questions about your audio tech as early as possible, because this will highlight to other people that think you just make a sound, that you don't just make a sound. Start asking them how you're going to be doing reverb, how you're going to be handling occlusion and spatialization. How many active voices are you going to be using? What your memory and CPU budgets are. That last one is important when you start getting onto things like phone and VR. And I kind of come back to talk on that soon, but again, it's more of the thing I mentioned before, just communication. That is a big pet peeve of mine, though, when it's last minute, you're rushing to get things done, and someone goes, oh, we've not got any audio for this character or creature or vehicle, and you're like, I'm doing my best to manage things. You got to get the ball rolling as early as possible. So thing I wish I'd known earlier is platform differences, and there are so many. This can really come back to bite you in certain points. I remember when I started, and I'm going to be honest, I was a little bit of a know-it-all, or thought I was a know-it-all. And then I found out very quickly that I was a bit out of my depth in some areas. So sometimes you find there's software-based differences, there's hardware-based differences, there's unfinished code in Unreal Engine that stops something working in PlayStation but works fine on Xbox. There's an interesting story we had on Train Sim with that one where the EQ in Unreal 4.23, was only finished for Xbox and PC and hadn't been finished on PlayStation. And it came to our attention that when someone went in a tunnel, all audio would cut out. And it took us ages to figure out what was going on. But essentially, the reverb of the tunnel was building up to such an extent that the EQ on the PC and Xbox was coming in and cutting out all the high frequencies, and you could hear it, it was fine. But on PlayStation, the EQ didn't work. Those high frequencies kept building and building, and PlayStation has a failsafe that will just cut all of your audio if you exceed a certain volume. So it just cut all the sounds out of the game, and we couldn't hear anything, and we had no idea what this was. And then someone was looking around, and loads of people had been complaining about a similar sort of thing. It turns out the EQ wasn't working, and it wasn't cutting out all of these high frequencies that we needed it to. And yeah, it was one of those silly things that, you know, could have been avoided if this one line of code had been added in. There's more. Here's another fascinating one that all audio designers need to kind of get to grips with as early as possible. Is if you're making things for phone or VR headsets that have built-in speakers, you're going to be making your sounds on high quality speakers, high quality headphones, and they're going to have a really good frequency response like this. And you're going to make something with a lot of awesome low end that you can feel, and it vibrates your room. And then you're going to put it on a Quest or your phone, and you're not going to hear anything because it can't reproduce it. The speakers on the Quest 2 are awful. I had this so many times. We had this kind of like obelisk sort of thing that span around, and it was like this big energetic like statue, and I made this sound that you could feel through the speakers, and it sounded awesome on headphones as well. Put it on Quest, and it's just not there. There's nothing. And when we were getting it reviewed, half the team were like, this sounds awesome, and the other half of the team were like, there's nothing. I can't hear a single thing. Has he even done any work? And it's because of limitations on your platform that you kind of need to understand. So do research on target platforms, because it will make your life a lot easier. And it means you can actually make the sounds you want to make. Thing I wish I'd known, number 7, is record what you can and when you have the opportunity to do so. But know that sometimes time frame and budget are not on your side, and you're not going to be able to do it all. Remember when I first got into the industry, I had the mindset of, I'm going to go and record every sound. I'm not going to use any libraries whatsoever. I'm going to go and record guns. I'm going to go and record jets and helicopters. And then you get into the industry and you've got a week to do something, you've got 2 weeks to do something. You don't have time to go on these trips and record things all the time unless you're at these really high-end studios. So sometimes you might even say, I'm going to spend the weekend and I'm going to go somewhere and do it myself. But you're not going to do that all the time. And it sucks because I want to go and record everything. And I'm sure a lot of you guys do as well. You want to be making all of your own source material, but it's just not viable unless you have the budget and the time frame to do so. And it sucks. It really does. But it's one of those things where you kind of just have to bite the bullet and accept. Number 8 is try to get as familiar as you can with as many VSTs as you can. You know, I mentioned earlier, a lot of studios are not going to go out and buy you the FabFilter bundle, and they're not going to buy you all the Waves plugins and all of this. And sometimes they won't even let you use your own plugins. I've I typically spend most of my salary on audio tools that is for my own benefit, and I can't use any of them outside of my own benefit, really. But it helps you. Like at Dovetail, at one point we didn't even have Reaper. We were using SoundForge, and we didn't have very many plugins. But I was adamant. I kept pestering whoever to get us as much as they can and whatever they can. And then in my spare time, I was learning all of these different compressors and distortion units and EQs. It might not be useful in your current situation, but it will be useful in the future in other situations. So always remember that. Like, you're limited to the tools you've got. Know as many tools as you can. You don't want to limit your creative approaches, but you also want to be quick to adapt, and knowing all of this will help you in the long run. Thing I wish I'd known, number 9. Not every task is creatively satisfying. You're not always making awesome gun sounds or monster roars or vehicle sounds. Sometimes you've got to do admin work. Sometimes you're working on really unpleasant sounds, and it will kind of ruin your day to some degree. I've spent multiple days trying to re-synthesize a hyper-realistic train horn because we can't get a good recording of it, but we're a simulation that needs hyper-realism. It's a nightmare in those situations. It's the best job in the world, but moments like that, when you're hearing this horn out of context for 2 days, it kills you. You finish work and you don't want to do anything. You just want to sit in a silent room. It's tough, but when you finally get it and you hear it in the context of the game and in the mix, it's really satisfying. But yeah, it's one of those necessary evils you kind of have to face. So the last thing I wish I'd known is audio is much like art and coding. Everyone will have their own skill sets. You should try to be as well versed in all of these as you can, but someone might be a very passionate field recorder and go out on their evenings and mic up all sorts of things. Someone like myself collects synthesizers. Someone might have a mix and mastering background. Try and learn from all of those people and add it to your skill set, but just know, everyone's got a skill set. That's why people go into tech audio, and some people go into creative audio, and some people go into managing and all of this sort of stuff. Like, play to your skills. Know that you can't be the best at everything. I fell into this pit before where I think I'm awesome at this thing, and then someone else comes along and says, "Oh, have you ever done this? Have you ever done that?" And then you got to put your learning hat back on. Always remember that there are people much more knowledgeable than you, and it's an industry where you're constantly learning. There's one bonus thing. Not everything can be perfect. Remember all those DLCs I showed. Majority of those took place within 1 year. Some were done in a matter of weeks or a single month. As you can imagine, when that situation happens, you're not going to be proud of every sound you put in, but you have to get it in. So sometimes speed is king. Sometimes you've got the time to perfect it, but you kind of have to pick those battles wisely. So I'm going to move on to some tips for you to kind of include in your portfolio. Hopefully some of these will be useful. So tip 1 is just constantly update everything, show the things you're working on, try to document it. If you're working on an audio redesign and it's got a sound in it that you think is really cool, document it, upload it in a separate video showcasing how you achieved it, and show how it fits in the context of your redesign. People love to see that stuff. It's more than just this linear thing at that point. It shows you're putting thought into your design. Step 2, try to make your portfolio diverse. Don't do 10 redesigns of AAA games. I know AAA games are typically the coolest and look the best and have some of the greatest sound design, but you're really shooting yourself in the foot when you do that. Those games are made by a group of talented people, and some of them are so iconic that it's hard to take your mind off of that when you're reviewing these pieces. You know, there's a natural bias there because you've spent time in that world playing that thing. If they'd picked a lesser well-known game that maybe you haven't played, you can actually sink your mind into that project a bit more and go, wow, that sounds really cool. But when it's a AAA game that everyone's played, it's very hard to dissociate what you've heard before and, you know, this solo piece. So if you're doing a lot of redesigns, do 1 or 2 AAA. Do not do a whole show reel of them because it can really hurt. Step 2 continued is do not just do redesigns. About 70 to 80% of game audio is how you implement a sound. It isn't just the sound effect. What I typically try to do is I'd do 1 really good redesign. I'd do a level in Wise or F mod, and then I'd do a really cool modular weapon sound system in Unreal. And that is your portfolio piece for that period, if that makes sense. Don't just do redesigns because they are a linear media format and you're trying to get into interactive audio. I've seen some applications of people who apply for game audio and they think they're qualified because they've done audio edits for Instagram and all of this stuff, and they're not showcasing their technical skills, and ultimately that's what we want to see. So work on Unreal, Wise and Fmod, and it will help your portfolio tenfold. I have some examples of my portfolio. I'm going to throw this out there. When you're doing some technical audio stuff, sometimes it doesn't need to sound incredible. It just needs to illustrate an interesting audio system. You know, if I showcase that I can make really good sounds in my redesign, they know I can do the sounds, and then I can showcase a really complicated system that is great and works well. And then in their mind, they can somewhat merge those two things together and say, okay, he makes the sounds, he can make this system great. The other thing with doing that sort of stuff, with creating great interactions, is it gets people talking more. Before I show these off, I've had more engagement from these 3 pieces than any redesign I've ever done combined. And I just kind of want that to sink in for this second video here. I got messages from people who worked at Epic Games saying they had it passed to them. Little things like that that really kind of catapult you into the top of people's lists for job roles. They're more memorable than redesigns. So kind of go through what these 3 are. So the top one is a generative procedural soundscape. So we're making synth wind out of white noise. Basically, all the sounds in a level are made using meta sound synthesizers. The second one is a music video I made that uses meta sounds to output audio information to Blueprint and control visuals. And the third one is a player patchable synthesizer that you can walk around a level and connect things together and have the player generate their own music. So here's the first one. So that was one piece of portfolio. Here's another one. I'll try and keep this one short. It's a fairly long video, but it should hopefully give you an idea. So there was another piece where I was using audio information being output to blueprints to control visuals, camera changes, meshes, etc. And then this one was just a silly idea I had where I thought, let's make a player patchable synth using meta sounds. It sounds awful, but the idea itself is really cool. So when I start connecting these to the outputs and filters and whatnot, you'll start hearing sound. Yeah, and then another tip. This is one that I love doing for my portfolio, and I cannot recommend it enough. Is read the Unreal Engine roadmap and then make something based on that. It gets you ahead of the curve. It keeps you learning. It puts you ahead of everyone else because I know so many great sound designers that only do things when they're at work. And yeah, I go into work and I'm like, oh, I've been playing around with this. And they're like, what? That's awesome. Teach me. Honestly, I've got another slide that kind of breaks this down some more. So if I were to do a portfolio piece for the experimental audio insights, I'd do a level that has audio, and then I'd do a split screen that kind of goes over the performance costs of everything, viewing audio insights to profile everything, how I'd use it to help my mix and management of assets. Another example, which I've just shown you, which is why I put the cough, is meta sound output watching. I'd try to make a music video that watches the outputs of a meta sound to influence visuals. For the harmonics plugin, I would try to create a step sequence synthesizer with the ability to play back MIDI, so you can play your Rush E in Unreal Engine if you so choose. Get creative. It's what the industry's about. Think of a cool idea and just wing it. I can't sell that one enough. I worked on this. It's not the greatest thing, but I was like, how can I make all of my gameplay logic sync up to music? So I came up with an idea of feeding all my inputs into a meta sound and then watching every output. So you end up with all of your gunshots timed to audio. So here's a short example of that. Another one is showcase other interactive audio systems. As I said, I used to be into Max MSP and Pure Data. So I used to build a lot of effects. I know I'm running low on time, so I'll only show one of these, but in my portfolio, I have a color tracking FM synthesizer that I occasionally show off. I saw someone say they used Dehumanizer. I'm a big fan of Dehumanizer, so I built a knockoff version because I couldn't afford the real thing when I was at university. So I built a version in Max MSP. I also built a granular vehicle engine. These are just like little things that a lot of people say are desirable skills when going into game audio that if you showcase, it kind of puts you a cut above the rest. I'll just showcase a little bit of the Dehumanizer knockoff. through all of this. Other tips for getting into the industry. Give and ask for feedback all the time. Ask questions. Post videos of you using new tools, plugins. Honestly, the people that will see it might be the people that offer you a job. You don't know. Join game jams. Join events like this. There's someone in the audience who I know I've met at another game audio talk, and we've spoke on LinkedIn before. Shout out to Paul. You know, it's things like this. Like, I now recognise him if I see his CV on a desk at my office. I'm going to say, give him an interview. I've met him a few times. Nice guy. You know, interact with people at events like this. It really does make a difference. If you can get in someone's good books, you know, it can always help. And that's pretty much everything. I think I've just hit the time as well.
Yeah,
I hope you enjoyed that.